Two types of thought are prevalent today in the homeschooling community concerning preschoolers. First, we can get so caught up in teaching our school-age children that we neglect our preschool children, or we feel that they're in the way when we're trying to teach the older kids. I know a number of homeschooling families who actually send their young ones to preschool so that they have time to work with their older children. And what kind of message does this give our children? You know, homeschooling is a family affair. The money spent on preschool could be more effectively spent on a babysitter or a housekeeper that can come into the home and help the homeschooling mother to do her job more effectively. How many of you would like to have a housekeeper, right? I'm sure you wouldn't pass that up, right? Or sometimes we go to the other extreme. We may be so determined that we're going to give our preschooler a head start academically, and they're going to be geniuses, whether they want to or not, that we pressure them into academics. It's so easy to get caught up in completing this textbook or that workbook to the point that meaningful education is pushed aside. Now, don't let this desire to master the skill overshadow the true goal, and that is of educating our children and preparing them for life. Don't cause the children to burn out on education at an early age. In either case, it's important that we not lose sight of our goal. And let's review point one. That is neglecting or begrudging our preschoolers because we have school-age children we must teach. Educational psychologists claim that more than half of a child's learning occurs during his first few years. More than half of a child's learning occurs during his first few years. So these are important formative years that should not be neglected. But just how do we teach the preschooler or entertain him while teaching our older children? I know this is often a difficult task because we don't have perfect children. My oldest daughter was recently reminding me about the measures that we had to go to keep my son Raymond out of trouble during his preschool years. And I remember one day in particular, Raymond was chasing his brother Robert through the house with a hammer, a real hammer. Now Raymond was 2 and Robert was 4, only Raymond was a little bigger than Robert. And he's chasing Robert, running through the kitchen with this hammer, his daddy's hammer, and I grabbed him by the arm and I said, "Raymond, what are you doing?" And his cute little voice, he goes, "I was pretending that Robert was a nail." And I burst out laughing. It's very hard to discipline a child when you're laughing. But you know, Raymond didn't always make me laugh. But I realized that the most important thing I could do to help Raymond was to give him my time. And that was hard because it meant taking time and sitting down and reading to him and just loving him. Our children don't need special programs, they need us. These little ones are so precious. It's important that we give them lots of hugs, cuddles, and books read on laps. It's important for them, and it's more important for us. They won't be little forever, and we don't want to regret that one day we didn't spend more time enjoying our preschoolers. But sometimes our many tasks and duties make it difficult to give the necessary time to our preschoolers, especially when we have school-age children to teach as well. The following system allows those of us with large families to effectively homeschool. While I'm working individually with one child, an older child will read aloud to a preschooler who needs supervision. Often we'll select a simple book relating to our topic of study for the older child to read aloud. Now this does several things. It helps to occupy the preschool child who requires supervision, while affording the older child practice with his oral reading skills. This aids in developing the sibling relationship, the older child's teaching capabilities, and the preschool child's language development while also expanding his general knowledge. The preschool child feels he's part of the learning experience. I find this is extremely important. They must feel included. While I'm working individually with one child and an older child's reading to a preschool child, my other children are reading silently from books geared to our topic on their reading levels, or they're engaged in some independent learning activity. Not only does this system work well for organizational purposes, but it fosters the development of numerous skills as well, because every child needs some individual attention. Every child needs to be able to teach someone else, and every child needs to be able to learn some material on his own. Let me repeat this because it's so important. Every child needs some individual attention from you. Every child needs to be able to teach someone else, and every child needs to be able to learn some material on his own. It's important also that every mother be able to maintain her sanity while homeschooling, and a system such as this helps in that. You'll find that if you begin your school day by spending time with your preschooler first, that your day will go more smoothly. As I read to my preschool child or play a game with them or do a puzzle, I admonish my older children not to interrupt. Hey, we're doing school, please don't interrupt. And this helps to set an example for the little ones to follow, so that when I'm working with the older children, they're respectful of that time and they don't interrupt. It also makes the young child feel grown up. And he has a special school materials just like the big kids. And you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much pride he takes in his school things. These may be books, games, puzzles, activities that he can do independently. And it's effective to get a box to keep these materials in and let him decorate his box. And I use these materials only during school time. That way they don't become too ordinary. I know that if you have a baby, that your day will be even more stressful. I have a preschooler and several school-age children, and I also keep my infant grandson several days a week while my daughter works. And I had to admit it was difficult to get back into the flow of things with the baby. I'd like to recommend the following resource that is chock full of creative ideas to use with your preschooler. It's called 100 Activities for Preschoolers by Leslie Rechko and Peggy Zorn. This book contains 102 activities to happily occupy your preschooler for 15 to 30 minutes with minimal adult preparation. As the authors state, to a frazzled mom who has several or just one child under 6 years old, 15 minutes of free time is a godsend. I found that when I set up some of these little activity centers for my preschool child, that my next child in line was anxious to get her schoolwork done so she could go play with her little brother. She liked these activities as well. One activity from the book that my children enjoy is called clothespins on a string. The idea is to take a yarn or rope and tie it from one chair back to another or one doorknob to another at the child's height. Place clothespins along the string evenly spaced, and then give the children index cards, maybe with numbers written on them or shapes that they can clip up on the clothespin. And we altered this game a little bit by letting the kids hang doll clothes on the clothesline. We even used this as a relay race at a birthday party. It was a lot of fun. So 102 activities for preschoolers is filled with simple yet entertaining ideas. And some of these ideas are so simple you think, gee, I could have thought of that. But I'm glad I didn't have to. It's nice to let someone else do the thinking sometime. Do any of you have a child who seems to gravitate toward water? When my daughter Mandy was little, she was always at the sink. She usually chose the sink farthest away from our schoolroom too, and I remember one day in particular I was preoccupied with another child, and I looked down and Mandy was missing. And I heard the sound of running water, and I knew there was trouble, and I followed that sound, and I found Mandy in the bathroom farthest away from our schoolroom. She was doing a little science experiment. She was seeing what would stop up the drain most effectively. And I came in and there was this beautiful waterfall flowing over the counter and down the hall. And I realized that I needed to be more creative with the activities that I provided for her in our schoolroom. I realized what I needed to do was create a controlled, messy situation. I kind of coined that phrase, a controlled, messy situation. It's great. I needed to have her close by where I could supervise her when she was getting into trouble. What I did was I took several beach towels and I laid them on the floor. Then I took a dishpan, put water in it, and put plastic dishes in it. And Mandy was able to sit there and play and wash the dishes while I worked with the older children. And I realized that this was not only effective in keeping her out of trouble, but that she was learning right along with the rest of the kids. She was listening while I worked with the other children. I recall that when she was nearly 3 years old, I was doing a sign language unit study with my older kids. And whenever we do a unit study, I always read at least one biography about an individual that pertains to our topic of study. And while conducting this unit study on sign language, I read aloud to my children the story of my life, Helen Keller's autobiography. And meanwhile, Mandy played happily on the floor, and it wasn't until nearly a year later that I realized how much she had absorbed. I was getting ready to do a workshop on the sign language unit study for our support group, so I went to the library to get all the materials that we had used the year before, and Mandy went with me. I pulled a copy of Helen Keller's autobiography from the shelf, and it has a photograph of Helen Keller on the front. And Mandy, now almost 4 years old, grabbed the book from me. She says, "Mommy, that's Helen Keller," and she couldn't see and she couldn't hear. And she went on telling me about Helen Keller, and I was dumbfounded. Children, when they're young especially, are like sponges. It's important that the things they soak up are worthy things. So that's why it's important, too, to have the preschoolers in the room as much as possible when working with your older children. Let's move on to discuss point number 2, and I'll repeat it so that we might discuss it more effectively. We may be determined to give our preschoolers a head start by pressuring them into academics. It's so easy to be caught up in completing this textbook or that workbook to the point that meaningful education is pushed aside. Please don't cause the children to burn out on education at an early age. If you notice, most young children are just excited about learning. A lot of them want to go to school when they're little. It's an exciting adventure. But by first grade, they're burned out. Why? Because the academics have been forced upon them. I mentioned previously that educational psychologists claim that more than half of a child's learning occurs during his first few years. Many people believe that we should begin formal instruction during these preschool years so as to take advantage of the child's natural ability to learn at an early age. It is crucial, however, that in our zeal we do not neglect other activities that are far more necessary to the child's development. It's important that our children participate with us in real-life experiences, for it's necessary that we provide a model for them to imitate. Our children need to be by our side as we go about our daily activities. A young child takes pride in helping mom and dad. I feel one of the simplest and most meaningful activities we can do with our children is to read good books to them. This will do more to help them become proficient readers and writers than any phonics program or workbooks. If we want our children to become good writers, they must be exposed to good literature. Otherwise, they will not know what good writing sounds like. We should begin this immersion in good literature at an early age. Children love the special attention they receive during read-aloud time. They know they have our undivided attention. Great literature also produces great minds. As my young children play, I am reminded of the positive influence of literature in their lives. Several years ago, when my youngest daughter Mandy was 7 years old, she began taking piano lessons. And this sparked an interest in the lives of the great composers. So we read more than 20 biographies about composers. I was amazed how she could keep them all neatly sorted in her mind. And I still have trouble with Bach and Beethoven and what they did, but she can keep it all just arranged neatly in her mind. And some of these biographies were the easy reader type, which she read to me, and others were more lengthy books, which I read to her. And this enthusiasm flowed over into her playtime, where she centered her activities on a composer's era. She managed to draw her little brother Randall, who was 2 at the time, into her pretend world. And I recall one day in particular when I rushed into the bedroom because I had forgotten about an orthodontist appointment that my older kids had. And there stood Mandy and Randall with coats on in the heat of summer and suitcases in hand. And I abruptly commanded, "Hurry up, take those things off, get in the van, we've got to go to the orthodontist now." They didn't even know I was in the room. And so I said, "Mandy, Randall, take those things off. We've got to go to the orthodontist now." Mandy puts her hands on her hips. She looks up at me and she goes, "This is Mozart. And I am Nannerl, his big sister. And Mozart has a concert in Vienna tonight, and we must be off." And I said, "Well, Mozart can have his concert when we get back from the orthodontist. We have to go now." And my son Robert, who was supposed to go to the orthodontist, my teenage son, was out in the hallway listening. He rushes in. "Nannerl, Mozart, hurry, hurry, the last coach leaves for Vienna in 5 minutes." And the 2 little waifs ran out and got in the van. And I just stood there, and Robert put his arm around my shoulder and he goes, "Mom, you just have to meet them in their world." And you know, he was right. And I encourage you to begin producing great minds as you assist your children in creating worlds of their own. A great book is a gateway into such golden worlds. I'm going to recommend another resource that's just the kind of book to open the world of literature for your preschool child, and it's entitled Before 5 in a Row by Jane Claire Lambert. This guide is a treasury of creative ideas to inspire learning readiness for ages 2 through 4. And she has a lot of useful ideas in this book, and my favorite idea that she has is called Your Child's Favorite Voice. And Jane says, "There are times when a parent simply cannot fulfill his child's request to read me another story, please. For these times, there are now many good stories on cassette tape. But an even more solution to this problem is to make your own cassette tape of your child's favorite stories. Your voice and all your child's favorite sound effects are far more wonderful to your little one's ear than any professionally produced tape money can buy. These homemade tapes are a great gift surprise, especially if you may have to be away for a day. An older sibling who enjoys reading and has drama production capabilities might enjoy making such a story tape and finding just the right background music and even props for sound effects." Like we said, a child enjoys hearing a well-loved story again and again. And you know, a great mind-building activity is to have the child retell or narrate a favorite story. Numerous skills are developed as he retells a story. His organizational skills are strengthened as he works at keeping the events of the story in proper sequence. His vocabulary is reinforced as he searches for just the right word. And his sense of composition is empowered as he weaves his tale. A simple method to encourage a child to narrate is to use a book that has lots of pictures. Allow him to retell the story while following the pictures. Once he's comfortable retelling a particular story, have him retell the story without the aid of the pictures, and then advance to reading some books that have few or no pictures. But be sure not to abandon picture books altogether. Those are my particular favorites. If a child has sufficient practice with oral narration or retelling a story while he is young, then when he's older and asked to write a composition, he will not find it too difficult. This is not only an effective teaching tool for young children, but for older children as well, who have difficulty with writing compositions. Have them orally narrate a story that you've either read aloud or that they have read to themselves. This method of narration has made master storytellers of all my children, and one of our favorite projects is to write our own books, write our own stories and make them into books. And these books are based on my guide, Creating Books with Children. Now, vocabulary drills whereby the child learns by rote memorization are a poor way to increase his word bank. Books, however, offer the child the experience of words. When my daughter Mandy was a preschooler, she delighted in having me read her the tales of Beatrix Potter. And Mrs. Potter didn't use a watered-down vocabulary at all. Rather, she used big words to whet their appetites. And I remember one day having read Mandy the Tale of the Flopsy Bunnies, which is my favorite. And that night after dinner, we were having chocolate cake. Mandy finished her cake and was eyeing her father's piece of cake. Then she said to him, "Daddy, you know what will happen if you eat all of that cake?" He said, "No, Mandy, what will happen?" She said, "Well, it'll make you soporific." And he looked at her in disbelief and said, "Well, maybe you better help me eat it." I then explained that the Flopsy Bunnies had eaten too much lettuce and had become soporific or sleepy. And while they were napping, Mr. McGregor put them in a bag to take home to his wife. It's this kind of interaction with good books that expands children's minds. Children love to be informed. It makes them feel grown up when they can become experts on a topic of interest. Good books open up new worlds for children as they meet people from faraway places and times. Geography becomes more than maps and globes as we travel to other countries through literature. History comes alive as we walk in the footsteps of someone from the past. And I have read the Little House Books on the Prairie aloud to my children now 3 times, 3 different groups of kids. And when I read this to my daughter Mandy, she was 5. Well, she was just enthralled. We lived in a log cabin for months. The sinks became wash basins. The mirrors became looking glasses. The vans became wagons. The older kids threatened to leave home, but for Mandy, history was a reality. Now at age 10, Mandy has a better flow of the history and world geography than I did at 20, than I do now, really. I mentioned that children love to become experts in a topic of interest. And when my son Randall turned 4, he became intensely interested in firefighting. Through books and visits to the fire station, he became an authority on the subject. And my oldest daughter, Michelle, made him a realistic firefighting uniform for his birthday. And he insisted on wearing it to a firefighter's block party that they had during Fire Prevention Week. Immediately after we got to the block party, a TV cameraman came up to my husband and asked him how old our son was. And my husband said, "Oh, he just turned 4. And the cameraman said, "Well, I'm afraid we can't use him. We're looking for an older child that can talk well." And because we want to clip a microphone on and follow him around to the different exhibits. So my son looked at Randall and he said, "Randall, you see that big truck over there? What kind of truck is that?" And Randall replied matter-of-factly, "Oh, that's an articulated crash rescue vehicle. They use those at airports." And the cameraman quickly clipped that microphone on my son and followed him around for 45 minutes. And as you can see, we have a clip from that newscast. He was actually on the news that night. Did Randall learn about fire trucks and fire safety through a textbook or workbook? Did he fill out worksheets on firemen? Did he color a fireman picture? No. He learned about them through real books and through real life experiences. Don't allow even good things to swallow up all of your time so you don't have time for the best things. So what curriculum do I recommend for preschoolers? I recommend any materials that encourage children to delight in literature. If you need help in finding excellent literature to read to your children, I suggest the book by Gladys Hunt, Honey for a Child's Heart. It offers a wealth of information about reading aloud to your children and includes a chapter on what makes a good book. When my daughter Mandy was a preschooler, she loved for me to read her the Frances books by Russell Hoban. There's 6 books in this series, and Frances is a badger, and she finds herself in many of the same circumstances that children find themselves in today. The first story in the series is bedtime for Frances. Frances doesn't want to go to bed. She has 800 reasons why she should delay bedtime. We all know about that. And these stories were written in the 1960s and have sort of an old-fashioned charm that's lacking in many of today's books. This led me to create some activities for her based on the Frances books. And my other kids were so excited by this, they said, "Mom, you got to make this into a book. You got to make this into a book." I said, "Okay." So with the help of my oldest daughter, Michelle, as an illustrator, I wrote the Frances Study Guide. And this study guide was written to be used with children at several levels, to making it a family-friendly guide. Now, children have extraordinary imaginations, and their creativity is enhanced through dramatic play, using dolls, puppets, stuffed animals, and so forth. And a favorite pastime of my young children is to act out scenes from the books that we're reading together. We as parents can encourage dramatic play by providing a variety of materials, and they don't need to be expensive. You know, my kids have always loved the games and toys that I have made for them far better than the ones that we have purchased. And they especially like it if they can help me make the item. Several years ago, I began making simple felt puppets for my children. And my kids once again said, "Mom, you've got to make this into a book." So once again, with the help of my daughter Michelle as an illustrator, we created successful puppet making. And the book includes patterns and activities based on 24 different animal puppets. It's important that these early learning experiences be kept fun. Resist the temptation to use workbooks and textbooks with preschoolers. They're nearly all a waste of money and potentially harmful. Don't encourage burnout before first grade. Do not try to make geniuses out of our young children. Some preschoolers may be able to learn difficult academic material, but crucial learning experiences will be sacrificed in order to do so. Children need to crawl before they walk and run. What the preschooler needs most in his day is you. Time shared in daily tasks and being part of the family unit are far more important than matching shapes and letters and colors in a workbook. All of these pre-reading skills can be taught through play, using puzzles, real objects, or games. Each year, children in preschools are introduced to academic material at an earlier and earlier age as a preventive measure for poor academic performance later on. But standardized test scores continue to decline despite these early intervention programs. Do not try to recreate school in your home. You have access to a superior mode of teaching. You provide a loving, warm atmosphere with a very low student-to-teacher ratio. Now, what school could do more? You know, the schools should be trying to imitate us, because the home is where the most effective learning takes place. Have a positive attitude towards your preschoolers. Don't feel they're a burden, preventing you from teaching the older children. The learning experiences that your preschoolers will encounter are as important, or even more important, I believe, than those of your older children. For it's in the formative years that they develop habits and impressions that will affect their academic performance for the rest of their lives. The most important lessons you'll teach your children are not academic, but they're lessons about relationships. And if you can provide a good model for your children, that's the most important thing. And the best place to learn these lessons is in the confines of a loving home. Thank you for allowing me to share with you today, and I want to encourage you to keep up the good work that you've begun. Yes, homeschooling is hard work, but I don't know of any better job. It's been an honor, a privilege, and a blessing to teach my children. It's my hope you catch some of my enthusiasm, and I've written a poem to describe my feeling about my job. And I hope it describes your feelings too. The poem's entitled, "I Am a Professional." I am a professional and I hold a high degree. My clients are but children and they're very dear to me. I work extended hours and the pay is not too fair, but the benefits are great. No other job can compare. So as I look around me and see women at their jobs, I gladly claim the title, full-time professional mom.
Time seems to fly, oh, the years pass so quickly now, like sand through your fingers. You hold it once and then it's gone. The